It's a pleasure to introduce Molly Antopol. Molly Antopol is a recent Wallace Stegner Fellow and Jones Lecturer and is currently the Draper Lecturer at Stanford University. She received her MFA from Columbia University, and her writing has appeared or is forthcoming in One Story, American Short Fiction, the Mississippi Review Prize Stories, Nimrod's Prize Stories, Croatia's Zarez, and on New York Public Radio and NPR's This American Life. The Un-Americans is her debut story collection. Antopol writes with ambition and a fine eye for character. Her stories bring us into key historical moments while detailing small but devastating shifts in families and relationships. The stories in this collection are beautifully written and novelistic in scope. They span generations and continents. In one story, an absent father and former dissident from communist Prague fears that the play his daughter is writing will reveal his flaws. In another, a young American woman and her Israeli husband are forced to reconsider their marriage after the death of her art collector grandmother. The characters in these stories are young and old, Israeli, Czechoslovakian, and American. They all share a deep humanity and all struggle to make sense of their lives and the times they live in. The Un-Americans is an ambitious and beautifully realized book, one that everyone should read. It's an honor to be introducing its author to you tonight, Molly Antopol. Well,
is this on? Wow, it's really on. Okay, thanks so much for coming, and this is great. I'm going to read just the opening of the last story in my book, which is called Retrospective. Friends quoted in the obituaries talked about Eva Kaplan in her heyday, back in the 60s and 70s. They talked about the parties she and her husband used to throw in their Jerusalem home, inspired by the secret apartment exhibits Eva had attended in Moscow. A few Russian artists were often in attendance, and friends recalled them standing in front of their paintings, surrounded by philanthropists and UN officials and Knesset members, while Eva swept through the crowd in a silky pantsuit, a cocktail in hand, wearing what appeared to be all of her gold at once. The exhibits went on in the living room, but displayed throughout her home was the permanent collection amassed over a lifetime. The Picassos and Legers bought for a pittance back in the 30s, when she was still a young and ambitious art student in Paris. The Cottons and Gottliebs she began collecting in the 50s during her years in New York. And, of course, the works that made her as famous in her circle as the painters themselves. The hundreds of pieces she'd smuggled out of Russia, right up to the fall of the curtain. The art, her friends admitted, wasn't always that great. Of course, the whole point, one friend said, was that it was supposed to be edgy and political, but there was no getting around how unappetizing it was to stare at a canvas of Nikita Khrushchev in a compromising sexual position each morning over breakfast. Other pieces had been virtually destroyed by the time Eva exhibited them. It was hard to know if the poor quality had to do with the fact that artists worked with anything they could scavenge off the streets, mud and trash and auto paint, or if it was the shoddy way Eva had packed them, so that by the time the smuggled art made it through customs at Ben Gurion and was unveiled on her wall, the canvases, which sometimes weren't canvases at all but paper bags or burlap sacks, were so faded and torn it was hard to see what the artist's original intent had been. All over the world, obituaries puzzled over how Eva had managed to perform one of the largest and most dangerous art smuggling operations of the 20th century. A curator in Stockholm, quoted in her Haaretz obituary, believed Eva may have surreptitiously rolled the thinnest sketches into rugs she'd purchased before going through airport inspection in Moscow, while the director of the National Gallery in London thought she may have hidden beneath the canvases of state-sanctioned art the unofficial works. But as Eva's will traveled across the Mediterranean and the Atlantic to her family in Boston, the biggest question for her daughter was what the woman had bequeathed to her. And I'll stop there.